Queer representation has always been a very important thing, especially for the trans community and especially in the modern political climate that we are currently in. With the rise of fascism and new waves of transphobia in places like the US and the UK, it has become blatantly apparent just how necessary trans representation actually is. Hello everyone, my name is Memorie. I am a trans woman and singer-songwriter, and today I wanted to talk about cis people being casted to play in the roles of trans characters in media. More specifically, I want to talk about a very recent casting that has happened. Not Squid Game, but I will get to that. I am, of course, talking about Lev from The Last of Us, but this time Lev from the Last of Us HBO series. The Last of Us was initially a game released on the PlayStation 3, and it is a horror/thriller, survival, linear horror, zombie apocalypse game. I love to be descriptive. Now, The Last of Us was one of my favorite games growing up, especially during high school. I remember playing it all the time on my PlayStation 4. It was the remastered one. I genuinely believe that it's one of those games that I think most people should really experience if they want to get into gaming. It is a masterpiece of a story. I remember before I played it, I thought I was too young to play it, so I put it in a box, and I wrote 18 box. And this was the box where when I turn 18, I open it, and that's gonna be my present. And I put The Last of Us in there because I was a fucking idiot. What the fuck is this? Oh, it's a bee! Hello! Bumblebee! Where's its stinger? Can't even see its stinger. I guess it's just not out. This is funny. There's a bee. How did this happen? It was just on me. It was just on me. I thought it was a moth. I wish there were flowers to give it, but it's really not the season. It's really not the season for nectar. Look at its butt. Oh, it went away. I'll put that in the video. So anyway, The Last of Us Part 2 is where this character Lev actually shows up. Lev is a part of this tribe, along with his sister Yara, called the Seraphites. He's part of the Seraphites, I guess, faction, which is the dominant opposing force of another kind of faction called the Wolves. And so the Wolves are like these kind of military boot camp people, and the Seraphites are like these kind of island tribes people. And Lev and his sister Yara is actually a part of this Seraphite community. However, what's important to note, which is why I sort of bring up this dynamic, is that Lev and Yara end up actually running away from this island because Lev is a trans boy. He is a 13-year-old trans boy, and the Seraphites, being these traditionalist tribes people, they rejected Lev's identity as a boy. And so Lev, with his sister, they ran away. And so that's why we end up coming across Lev and his sister in the game when we play as Abby, which is one of the playable characters. And we then go on to help these two Seraphites throughout the story. And so Lev being a trans boy is quite important to this story. It's quite important to this context. The reason why Yara and Lev leave this island is because Lev is trans and the Seraphites rejected his trans identity, so they ran away. So you can imagine my dismay when I opened up Reddit and I saw that the casting deciders for The Last of Us Season 3 decided to cast a cis woman to play a 13-year-old prepubescent trans boy. A 13-year-old prepubescent trans boy. And so there are a few reasons as to why this isn't a very good idea. And I want to go over a few of them. I want to try and lay my case. That's what this video is for. I want to just kind of talk about it. I just want to talk about it. There aren't a whole lot of reasons for a cis person to appropriately play the character of a trans person, but I can think of one. And it is not because there aren't that many trans people on Earth. People like to argue that it's because of that there's not much trans people, but I completely disagree. We are 2% of the population. 2%. That is, yes, it's a small percentage, but that is a lot of people. right? I think there are plenty of trans people and trans actors. You just gotta look for them. Because they are there. The reason why they're so hard to find is because trans people are so underrepresented. We're going full circle. Trans people aren't being represented, and because trans people aren't being represented, people think that there aren't trans actors available. So they hire a cis person, then making trans representation even more scarce. So thus it is like a reinforcing kind of system going on here. It's self-reinforcing system. It's very, very difficult to get a gig as a trans actor. As a trans person in general, it's very hard to find work. That's why a lot of us are in sex work. And so, because there's so little job opportunities for trans people, it in turn makes it appear that there's not many trans actors available, then making it look like it's not appropriate to hire trans people because there isn't good accessibility to a trans actor because there's not many of them, but it's just not true. It's just because they're underrepresented, and they are underrepresentation is making them more underrepresented. It's a catch-22. So is it a catch-22?
That's some catch, that catch-22.
So I completely disagree that there aren't enough trans actors. I genuinely believe you just need to look for them, and you will find them, and you'll be doing us a huge favor because we need representation. We need gigs. We need to be treated like cis people. What I actually believe is the more appropriate reason as to why someone would cast a cis person to play a trans character is simply for the safety of the trans actor. The trans community is they're very targeted often. They're a targeted demographic. And because of this, they are constantly vulnerable for harassment. And a lot of this hatred and scorn targeting the trans community mainly stems from this misunderstanding, this lack of understanding that the general public has of the trans community. And this blind spot in the general public is utilized intentionally by reactionary politicians and conservative podcasters of the like in order to distract the public from more pressing issues like the cost of living and gas prices and such onto an easy scapegoat, which is, in today's age, the trans community. A good example of this would be Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney is a trans woman. She is a trans influencer. And back in Pride Month of 2023, there was a harassment campaign, or I guess more or less, there was this conservative pushback with Dylan Mulvaney in the center. We couldn't escape it. Everyone was talking about Dylan Mulvaney. It was Dylan Mulvaney this, Dylan Mulvaney that. I can't believe this is the thing. And what did Dylan Mulvaney do to deserve this pushback? Oh, she must have done something absolutely horrible. She must have shot her dog or something. Oh wait, but what Dylan Mulvaney did to deserve this conservative pushback, Dylan Mulvaney had a advertisement campaign with the beer company Bud Light, and in this advertisement campaign, Bud Light sent a Bud Light can with her face on it, and that's it. That's all that happened. Dylan Mulvaney alone proves that all you need to do is just exist as a trans person to get hate and conservative backlash. You don't need to do any crime against humanity. You don't need to do any pedophilia or going to the Epstein's Island and being in the Epstein file. Really, you just need to exist in an advertisement campaign on a brand that has a conservative market base. That's all you need to do. Just exist in their world. So going back to my initial point, it's very easy to get targeted harassment just by existing as a trans person, which is why it can be the safe decision to cast a cis person to play as a trans character instead of a trans person, because in order to limit the harassment. However, with that being said, I really don't think that that would be too much of a worry with this specific piece of media, with the HBO Last of Us series season 3. I really don't think that that is a big worry. And here's why. The Last of Us is already a relatively queer series with a relatively queer fan base. And this is also true for the series. In fact, in the first season of the Last of Us HBO series, there was conservative backlash for the featured gay relationships in that series. Like, there was an episode with these 2 gay men characters, and the whole episode was based on that, and conservatives got angry. So there has been backlash of this series before, and that paired with the fact that this is already a relatively queer piece of media with a relatively queer audience, I really don't think that if they were to cast a trans person as Lev, the backlash, there would be backlash, right? There's always backlash. There's always conservatively chronically online people. But I really don't think the backlash would be anything special. Because 1, there's already been a backlash. And 2, The Last of Us has already been established in the conservative mind as woke propaganda. I feel like the most common response from a conservative would just be an eye roll. Just like another trans person. They're not gonna be like, what the hell? I love this media. Why is there a trans person? They don't like the media anymore. They already hate it. They have already established that they think this is woke propaganda. And if they're okay with it, then they're either a minority in the Conservative Party, or they're just good with queer people. You know what I mean? So there's not gonna be this bigger backlash, you know? Like, there's gonna be chronically online people that are gonna be mad. That's inevitable. And second of all to that, Lev is already a trans character. Like the trans character Lev was always going to be in this series. There was always going to be a trans character in this series, right? So all the people that were going to get mad that there is a trans character in this new season, we're going to get mad anyway, right? They're going to get mad now that there's a cis woman playing a trans character because they just don't want to see trans people. So, like, it really wouldn't make a difference if it was a trans person playing as Lev, because it would just basically be the same. Theoretically, four. Ow. So that's why it's silly to hire a cis person to play as Lev in the first place. But theoretically, what if there is no way to get a trans actor and you had to get a cis actor, right, to play as Lev, right? Okay. Even in that case, I still see this as just ridiculous, because just hire a cis guy. Why hire a cis girl to play a boy when you can hire a boy to play the boy, right? Right. So I argue that if there were no trans actors available, then they should at the very least, hire a cis boy to play as Lev. Not a cis girl, because Lev is not a girl, okay? And this is especially so when we actually look at Lev's character in the game. If you look at Lev, he passes as a boy, which makes sense. He's prepubescent. He hasn't gone through puberty yet. His body hasn't developed any physical reasons for our brain to distinguish us that this is a boy or a girl. Because the only things that really we use to differentiate genders of children is like hair and clothing. And Lev is prepubescent, and so he's androgynous, and so he passes for his age and gender. So I really don't understand the logic of hiring a cis woman to play the part as Lev, because Lev passes, right? Lev passes, and you could just hire a boy. You could just hire a cis boy, and it would be better, or like a million times better. And so when I look at this casting decision of a cis woman playing the part of a trans boy, a 13-year-old prepubescent trans boy, it just tells me that, like, the casting director just sees us as our assigned gender. And it just reinforces the idea that trans people are nothing more than our assigned gender at birth. That message, right? Because that's what that tells me. And, like, that's not representation. That's not what representation is supposed to make you feel. And especially since most trans people have this thing called gender dysphoria, right? And what gender dysphoria is, it's a feeling of distress that emerges when they are associated with a gender that they do not identify as, that they do not feel themselves as, they do not express themselves as. And when there is this misalignment of the trans person's identity and how they are treated or how they see themselves, that causes distress, right? That causes a sense of panic. And as a trans person myself, right, I, throughout high school, experienced the worst gender dysphoria. It was, like, I literally had to drop out of school. It was so bad. And it took a little bit to recover from it, because it's a horrible thing to experience. It is a horrible, horrible thing to experience. And if you cast a cis woman to play the part of a trans boy, that is inevitably going to cause gender dysphoria in the trans community, right? That's why we have this kind of, like, disgust, right? This kind of, like, this kind of cringing feeling, right? It's very awkward, and a little more than awkward is an understatement. And it causes dysphoria because it's basically signaling to us that the people in charge of this decision, they just see us as our assigned gender at birth. They don't see us as the gender we identify as. They just see us as what we were born as, or what our biological components are. Like, you know, whatever biological component they pick, chromosomes, genders, whatever the fuck, whichever one. And the reason why this casting choice would cause gender dysphoria amongst the trans community is because it basically just signals that the people who made this decision, they don't see us as the gender that we identify as. They don't see us as the gender that we express ourselves as. They just see us as the gender we were born as the sex that we were born as. And, you know, that is going to cause gender dysphoria. And if a piece of representation is causing distress like that, a neurological negative effect, it's not like hurting your feelings or anything. It's like a proper neurological effect. Like, if representation is doing that, that's not good representation. It's bad representation, and we don't want bad representation, in my opinion. I don't want bad representation. I want good representation. That's what I want in my America. Now, I do want to say that there is an exception to the rule. There are cases where you can cast a cis actor to play as a trans character when that cis actor is the gender of the trans character's assigned sex at birth. There are exceptions. There are exceptions where it would be appropriate. Enter Squid Game. So in the second season of Squid Game, there was this trans character, and this trans character was played by a cis man. And I believe that this is one of the few exceptions where this would be appropriate. Though awkward, I will say, it was still awkward. Even if it's appropriate, it is still awkward. It does tickle that gender dysphoria in us, right? But the reason why I view this as the exception is mainly because of what is important for that trans character. Like, what is important to them to represent with that trans character. In Squid Game, the trans character was written to be non-passing, right? She doesn't fully pass as a cis woman. And this is, like, obvious in some of, like, the dialogue, like the old lady's like, is that a man? Like, what is that? And it's like, it's this whole thing, and it's like, it develops this whole character arc. So it's vital to the story for the trans character to not be trans-passing. And on top of that, it would also not be a good idea to hire a non-passing trans woman, or at least it would be less safe, because Squid Game doesn't have the same privileges as The Last of Us, because it's more mainstream, and also it's not particularly... It hasn't got a particularly queer audience. So if instead the trans woman of Squid Game was not played by a cis man, but was actually played by a non-passing trans woman, that would 100%, not a doubt in my mind, cause a hate campaign. That person would be harassed relentlessly. And it's because non-passing trans women fit so nicely in this narrative that conservative politicians and figureheads utilize as a weapon, right? And so for the safety of the trans person, and to also make sure that the show doesn't lose these important trans details that the trans character doesn't pass, then yeah, the only option would be to cast a cis man to play as the character. It's the only safe option. So that is the exception to rule. And again, it is awkward for us, right? It does tickle us a little bit. Like, it's a little cringe. I and many others had like a sort of gag reflex when we first saw the news that a cis man was playing a trans woman in Squid Game 2, right? There was this instinctual gag reflex, but when I rationalized it in my head, right, and I realized, okay, this is for the safety of a particular trans person, then it gets a pass, right? This is the exception to the rule, and it's allowable. And with that being the exception to the rule, I strongly believe that The Last of Us does not fit that exception. The trans character in question passes as the gender they identify as. The series itself has a queer audience and is relatively queer itself. And I also don't think there is a safety worry. One, because of like the I said before, but also because like, you know, it's a 13-year-old boy. Like, if there is like this like conservative pushback of this trans character existing and a trans actor playing as the trans character, the harassment probably wouldn't be concentrated at the trans actor, because it's a 13-year-old, and also because trans men fit a different kind of transphobic narrative, where when trans women are depicted as like sexual predators and like people that need to be protected from, trans men are depicted as like confused like lesbians or confused women who need to be protected. And that's not saying they wouldn't be harassed at all. Like, they would definitely be harassed. Trans people get harassed. It's just the experience. But it wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't be to the extent. It wouldn't be like conservative figureheads with a megaphone screaming that you should kill this person, kill this person. No, trans men do receive heavy backlash, heavy transphobia. It just comes in a different form, right? It's packaged in a different level of misogyny, which is why it's just doesn't make any sense to cast a cis woman. It doesn't make any sense. Whatever angle I try to cut it in, any kind of like potential reason I come up with, it all just kind of falls flat, right? I can't find a good reason why this would be an appropriate decision, is what I'm saying. And so yeah, that's just about it, really. I don't think this was a good casting choice. I don't think it's a good idea to cast a cis woman to play as a prepubescent trans boy who passes. Like, honestly, it just comes across as a middle finger to the trans community. But that's all I wanted to say, really. That's all I wanted to say in this video. I hope you enjoyed listening. This took a while to record. I stutter through my words a lot. But if you did enjoy it, please make sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even sharing it as well, because, you know, I'm always trying to expand my community, you know, try to establish my base as a content creator. I make songs and other kinds of music. I want to make games as well, mainly songs, and I also want to keep making content like this. I want to talk about whatever I want to talk about, really, regarding like trans issues and trans stuff, maybe even also stuff about my autism, ADHD, and maybe Tourette's as well, because I do have Tourette's. And of course, it happens when I say it. But if you enjoyed this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Be sure to watch other videos or wait for me to upload more videos, because I'm still working on it, but I'm getting there. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. See ya. Yeah. that everything?